Hi there, welcome back to Recap Cinema. Today, I will continue the recap of the television show titled Silo. Juliet looks through the file left by Holston in her apartment when a porter knocks at the door. He delivers a message from Sims informing her of the death of Sam Marnes. In his apartment, Sims and Paul Billings look over the dead body. Sims tells Juliet that Billings is her new chief deputy as Bernard arrives, hoping they have control of the situation. When the mortuary team arrives, Juliet asks for a minute alone with the body and takes a list of citizens from Marnes' pocket. Later, in the mayor's office, a discussion ensues about preventing the spread of rumors regarding the murder within the silo. They collectively agree on a strategy to fabricate a narrative that Marnes and Ruth Johns were deeply in love, and consequently, their final resting place would be side by side. Although technically an unsanctioned relationship, Bernard believes that considering their age, it won't be an issue, and talk of forbidden love is better than talk of homicide. He also plans to announce a race up the silo, with the winner to be awarded the Johns Trophy. Sims and Billings are dismissed, but Bernard asks Juliet to stay. He knows that Juliet does not like Billings being appointed as chief deputy without her input, but tells her that the pact says that the sheriff's department has to bow to judicial. Johns and Marnes are given a funeral and buried in the soil of the gardens, so their bodies can serve as fertilizer for the crops that sustain the silo. Bernard and Juliet speak at the gathering, reminding the residents of the silo that both dedicated their lives to the silo, and they should be remembered and celebrated for it. Later in the sheriff's office, Juliet meets Hank, who warns her that people in the silo are scared, and while he knows she can do anything she sets her mind to, he also knows that no one can do it alone. Sandy confronts Juliet in her office and wants her to find out who really killed Marnes and not go along with whatever story judicial concocts, because Judge Meadows wants to maintain order rather than expose the truth of the situation. Juliet and Billings begin an investigation into Marnes' death, using the list of citizens she found on his body. They question Charles Martin first, who claims to have been in the hospital at the time, and Juliet, seeing his hand was shaking from the syndrome, knows he wouldn't have been able to kill Marnes. Sending Billings to go have lunch with his family, Juliet goes to see Patrick Kennedy alone. As he is not in his apartment, she breaks in, finding evidence including a box of rat poison and a drawing of Johns that Marnes had in his apartment. Billings visits Sims in judicial rather than going home and learns that Douglas Trumbull is being considered to be Sims' shadow. Juliet finds Kennedy and takes him into unofficial protective custody. Later, Billings admits to visiting the judicial because he wanted to know what their investigation was like and knows that they have access to information that the sheriff's department has not. However, he tells Juliet that judicial is looking at Ralph Melby, a low-level gambler. Juliet issues an arrest warrant for Kennedy, hoping to flesh out judicial because they want her to waste her time looking at Melby to undermine her. With Silo engrossed in the race to the top, Juliet encounters Trumbull outside Kennedy's apartment. Except it is not Kennedy's apartment, since he moved last year after the death of his wife, and judicial planted evidence in the wrong home. A chase ensues, leading down onto the stairs just as the foot race is coming up. Juliet and Trumbull clash, and he throws her over the rail and attempts to kill her. Juliet fights back but has to be rescued by other residents of the silo as Trumbull gets away. Later, Sims humiliates Trumbull for his failures. Nonetheless, he offers Trumbull to be his shadow, and when he accepts, Sims pushes him over the railing to his death. Juliet and Billings meet with Judge Meadows and Sims and tell them about Trumbull's attempts to frame Kennedy. Meadows doesn't believe it but accepts the story to suppress conspiracy theories. Later, Juliet and Billings discuss their mutual trust in each other, and Sammy informs the sheriff that she has requested reassignment to the station on level 105 because she feels like she is being watched. Juliet meets with Bernard, who is planning to hold a forgiveness holiday and needs her deputies to be prepared for it. He also tells her that he was wrong about her and pledges to support her as long as he is mayor. Juliet requests 2 days off to return to the Deep Down and collect her belongings and say proper goodbyes. Juliet meets Lucas Kyle in the cafeteria and finds that he is charting the lights in the sky from the outside camera feeds. They have no idea what they are, but he has been studying them long enough to realize there is a rotating pattern as if they were moving in a large circle. Juliet goes to see Martha, who is worried about her. However, she has made progress on the relic that Juliet left her, recognizing it as a kind of camera. Martha tells Juliet that two mysteries in the silo confused her. One is that no mechanization of the way to go up and down the silo, such as lifts or pulleys, and the other is that no magnification over a certain level. Later, Juliet goes to George's camp and retrieves the relic he left for her. Billings and Juliet begin investigating Trumbull's apartment for any information on why he killed Marnes. During the search, Billings finds a relic, the same relic that Juliet had previously been given by George Wilkins. In a flashback, Juliet and George Wilkins talk about his dangerous sideline in collecting relics and their joint effort to steal a heat tape. George wants to know why Juliet risked stealing it. and she tells him that the heat tape can save lives even though the stolen heat tape was defective. Juliet wants to know why George collects relics because she feels that they are not worth risking his life over. George counters that if they aren't important, then why is it illegal to own them? George then gives Juliet his watch even though it doesn't work. In present, the silo gears up for a forgiveness holiday where residents are encouraged to travel and reconnect with old friends, give gifts, and spend money. Juliet looks up the relic in the law enforcement database, but her description is insufficient. Billings arrives and is surprised that she did not turn the relic into judicial. He also has a note from a porter from recycling that says that the hard drive was not found. Billings tells Juliet about the illegality of keeping the relics past 12 hours of their discovery. Juliet and Billings meet with Sims and are escorted to see Meadows, who is feeling unwell. Juliet presents the relic and wants to open an investigation into Trumbull, but Sims doesn't believe that relic belonged to Trumbull and that the watch Juliet wears is registered to George. Sims does agree to the relic's investigation since people will be more inclined to hand over any illegal items during a forgiveness holiday. Juliet and Billings go to see Kennedy, looking for the name of someone who deals in relics. Kennedy is reluctant to give up the name, but eventually does after subtle threats. Sims investigates the relic found in Trumbull's apartment and finds an entry for it, showing it to be a pre-silo artifact. In the cave, George talks about how history is just a record of people, and if Juliet ever wonders what is beyond the silo. She says that she doesn't but likes the feeling when George talks about it, and then she shows him his watch that she fixed. Later, Juliet and Billings visit Regina Jackson. Juliet is surprised to learn that Regina recognizes the watch as it belonged to Regina's boyfriend, George. Sims continues his investigation and reveals that the relic was in the possession of George. Regina informs Juliet that George essentially used her to buy relics, figuring that her large family would be a good cover for it. She makes pointed references to how George left her to go to mechanical in search of the big illegal questions, and that he probably moved on to someone else that could help him since he wasn't the type of person to spend forever with. Regina no longer possesses relics and has been over the information with Judicial before. Sims calls a meeting between him, Bernard, Juliet, and Billings to reveal the information he found. Bernard says that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Later, Juliet thanks Billings for not revealing that she and George were in a relationship, but he is angry that she dragged him into a dire situation since he now knows she planted the evidence in Trumbull's apartment. Billings wants honesty from her, but Juliet counters that she knows that he is suffering from the syndrome. Juliet heads home through the cafeteria and encounters Lucas again. Even though there were no lights in the sky tonight, Lucas came up to see Juliet. Billings goes home, and his wife helps him to soothe the symptoms he is experiencing. Billings worries that his condition has passed his daughter and tells his wife that he is grateful for both of them in his life. In a flashback, Juliet asks George what his big questions are, and he responds with several. What is outside the silo? What is beyond the range of the sensor? And why are they here? In present, Juliet calls Walker and tells her that she is quitting the sheriff's role in the morning and coming home. When Martha asks if she solved George's murder, Juliet replies she no longer cares about him as he cheated on Regina. Martha asks her what kind of person she is and why she went up top and took the role in the first place because George never asked her to do it. She tells Juliet that while she could come back to mechanical, she should not let the anger cloud her judgment. Juliet goes to see Regina again, confronting her about the fact that she is the Judicial's confidential source and the reason that George is dead. Regina tells her that the Judicial isn't the problem, but the man who comes at night and wants the information. He threatened her family and told her about everyone she had interacted with during the day. Regina gave up the information on relics and the relic dealers to save her family. Juliet realizes that the reason Kennedy gave her Regina's name is because it was one that the Judicial already had. Regina was the source of the hard drive, and George gave her something that was handed down through his family for generations. Regina gives it to Juliet and tells her not to speak out loud about its contents because it can get her killed. Juliet returns to her apartment and looks at the relic, which is a picture book. Inside are images of lush green forests, people enjoying water rafting, and animals that are unknown to Juliet. As she reads, Juliet is unaware that she is being monitored by two technicians, watching on a video screen more advanced and larger than anything common in the silo. One of the technicians tells the other they need to wake someone and that he needs to see this despite it being the middle of the night. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more videos.